What happens when one of the most respected hosts in late-night television comes face-to-face with someone who refuses to play by the rules? In just 31 seconds, a single comment would turn a lighthearted interview into the most shocking exit in talk show history. The Late Show studio was buzzing with its usual energy that evening. Stephen Colbert sat behind his desk, his trademark smile ready for another interview. The audience was packed, excited to see the guest who had been promoted all week long. Meghan Markle walked onto the stage in a designer gown that probably cost more than most people make in a year. The audience applauded politely as she made her way to the guest chair. Stephen stood to greet her, extending his hand with genuine warmth. She barely acknowledged the gesture, offering a limp handshake before settling into her seat and immediately adjusting her dress as if the chair itself was beneath her standards. "Welcome to the show," Stephen began, his voice carrying that familiar mix of humor and authenticity that his viewers loved. "It's great to have you here." Meghan glanced at him with a thin smile. "Well, I suppose someone has to do these things," she replied, her tone already setting an uncomfortable atmosphere in the room. The audience laughed nervously, unsure if it was meant to be a joke. Stephen, ever the professional, pushed forward. "So, you've been involved in a lot of different projects lately. I wanted to talk about your recent work and what you're passionate about." "My work?" she interrupted, leaning back in her chair with an air of superiority. "Stephen, my work transcends what most people would understand as work. I'm not just doing projects, I'm changing the world." Stephen nodded, trying to maintain his composure. "That's wonderful. Can you tell us specifically what you're working on right now?" Meghan waved her hand dismissively. "Details are for people who need to understand everything spelled out for them. My vision operates on a different level." The audience had gone quiet now. This wasn't the fun banter they were used to seeing. Stephen's smile remained, but anyone who knew him could see the slight tension in his jaw. "Well, I think our audience would love to hear about your vision," Stephen pressed gently. "That's why they're here." She looked out at the crowd as if noticing them for the first time. "Yes, I suppose they are," she said with barely concealed condescension. "Though I do wonder if this is really the right audience for what I have to say." Stephen's eyes widened slightly. "I promise you, our viewers are incredibly intelligent and engaged. They tune in specifically to hear meaningful conversations." "Meaningful," Meghan repeated, as if the word itself amused her. "Stephen, do you even know what meaningful is? You sit here night after night, making jokes about politicians and celebrities, and you think that's meaningful?" The studio had become so quiet you could hear the cameras adjusting their focus. Stephen sat up a bit straighter, his professional demeanor still intact, but clearly being tested. "I think humor can be a powerful tool for discussing important issues," Stephen responded carefully. "It helps people process difficult topics and stay informed." Meghan laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Informed? Your audience comes here to be entertained, not informed. Let's not pretend this is something it's not." "I respectfully disagree," Stephen said, his voice still measured but firmer now. "Our viewers are smart people who can appreciate both humor and substance." "Oh, please," Meghan scoffed. "You're just another late-night host trying to stay relevant. Don't lecture me about substance." A few audience members gasped. This had crossed a line, and everyone in the room felt it. Stephen took a breath, clearly choosing his next words carefully. "I invited you here as a guest on this show to have a conversation," Stephen said, his tone still remarkably even. "I've treated you with nothing but respect." "Respect?" Meghan's voice rose. "You want to talk about respect? You booked me on your little show, and you think that's doing me a favor? I'm the one giving you ratings right now." The audience was completely silent now, watching this train wreck unfold. Stephen's producer could be seen in the wings, looking panicked and unsure what to do. "I think maybe we should take a quick break," Stephen suggested, trying to de-escalate the situation. "Don't you dare cut to commercial on me," Meghan snapped. "I'm not finished speaking." Stephen looked directly at her, his patience clearly wearing thin but still maintaining his professionalism. "Actually, this is my show. I decide when we go to break." "Your show," she said mockingly. "This whole thing is beneath me. Do you know who I am? Do you know what I've been through?" "I do," Stephen replied calmly, "and I've been very mindful of that, which is why I'm confused about why you're being so hostile." Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Hostile? You haven't seen Hostel. You sit here in your comfortable little studio, making your comfortable little jokes, and you think you understand anything about real struggle? Stephen remained seated, looking up at her with a mixture of concern and frustration. I never claimed to understand your specific experiences. That's why I wanted to hear from you. Hear from me? She shouted. You wanted me here as a spectacle, just another guest for you to bounce your mediocre jokes off of. The audience was stunned. Some people looked at each other in disbelief. Others stared at the stage, unable to look away from the disaster unfolding before them. Stephen finally stood, his tall frame matching her energy. I'm going to ask you to calm down, he said firmly, but not unkindly. We can have a civil conversation, or we can end this interview right now. Oh, you'd love that, wouldn't you? Meghan fired back. You'd love to make me the villain here, the difficult guest who couldn't handle a simple interview. Nobody's making you a villain, Stephen responded. You're a guest on my show, and I'm asking you to have a respectful conversation. That's all. Meghan pointed her finger at him, her face flushed with anger. Don't you dare patronize me. I came here thinking this would be a platform where I could actually speak my truth, and instead, I get this. This carnival. This carnival, as you call it, is watched by millions of people who appreciate honest, thoughtful discussion, Stephen said, his voice rising slightly for the first time. I work hard to create that space. Work hard? Meghan laughed bitterly. You read off a teleprompter and make faces at the camera. That's not work. The audience was getting uncomfortable now. A few people shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. The tension was unbearable. Stephen took a deep breath, clearly trying to center himself. I'm going to give you one more chance to sit down and have a real conversation with me. Otherwise, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Ask me to leave? Meghan's voice reached a new pitch. You can't ask me to leave. Do you know what that will do to your precious ratings? Do you know what people will say? I care more about maintaining a respectful environment than I do about ratings, Stephen said quietly but forcefully. Please sit down, or please leave. Meghan stared at him for a long moment, her chest heaving with indignation. You're actually serious. Completely serious, Stephen confirmed. Fine, Meghan spat. I don't need this. I don't need you. And I certainly don't need your audience. She turned to walk off the stage, but then stopped and turned back around. You know what your problem is, Stephen? You think you're better than everyone else. You think your political comedy makes you some kind of moral authority, but you're just a man with a desk and a camera. Stephen stood there, his hands in his pockets, watching her with sad eyes. I never claimed to be better than anyone. I just try to do my job with integrity. Integrity, Meghan sneered. That's rich coming from someone in Hollywood. I'm actually from South Carolina originally, but that's beside the point, Stephen said. And despite everything, there was the tiniest hint of his humor showing through. The point is, you came here angry, and I don't know why. But I'm not going to let you tear down what we've built here. What you've built, Meghan mocked. A late-night talk show. How original. How brave. It might not seem like much to you, Stephen said, his voice softer now. But it means something to the people who work here and the people who watch, and I'm proud of it. Meghan shook her head, her expression a mix of disgust and disbelief. You're actually proud of this? This is what you aspire to? Yes, Stephen said simply. I am proud. I get to talk to interesting people, make people laugh, and hopefully make them think a little. That's enough for me. Well, it's not enough for me, Meghan declared. I deserve better than this. I deserve a platform that matches my importance. The audience couldn't stay silent anymore. A few people booed. Others called out in support of Stephen. The situation was spiraling completely out of control. Stephen raised his hands, asking the audience to settle down. It's okay, everyone. Let's stay calm. Don't tell them to calm down, Meghan shouted over the noise. Let them react. Let them see what a joke this whole thing is. The only joke here is how you're behaving right now, Stephen said, and his voice had an edge to it now. I've given you every opportunity to have a meaningful conversation, and you've thrown it back in my face. Because this isn't a meaningful conversation, Meghan screamed. This is a performance. You want me to sit here and smile and answer your prepared questions like a good little guest, and I won't do it. I wanted you to be yourself, Stephen said, spreading his arms. But apparently yourself is someone who comes onto someone else's show and insults them, their work, and their audience. Meghan's face went red. How dare you? How dare I? Stephen's voice finally rose to match hers. How dare I? What? Stand up for myself? Stand up for the people who work on this show? Stand up for the viewers at home who tuned in expecting a real interview? Your viewers don't matter, Meghan shouted. The studio fell silent again. That statement hung in the air like poison. Even Meghan seemed to realize she'd gone too far, but she didn't back down. Stephen stared at her, shaking his head slowly. Get out. What? Meghan said, her eyes narrowing. I said get out, Stephen repeated, his voice low and controlled. You just insulted every single person watching this show. You insulted the people who work here. You insulted me. I'm done. This interview is over. You can't kick me out, Meghan said, but her voice had lost some of its fire. I absolutely can, Stephen said. This is my show. These are my rules. And rule number 1 is respect. You don't have to agree with me, you don't have to like me, but you will respect the people here. And since you clearly can't do that, you need to leave. Meghan looked around as if searching for support, but found none. The audience was firmly on Stephen's side. His producers were nodding in agreement. Even the camera operators looked uncomfortable with her behavior. This is outrageous, Meghan said, but her voice had changed. She sounded less confident now, more defensive. What's outrageous is that I have to ask a guest to leave my show, Stephen said. In all my years doing this, I've never had to do this. But you've left me no choice. Fine, Meghan said, drawing herself up to her full height. I'll leave, but everyone will know about this. Everyone will know how you treated me. They can judge for themselves, Stephen said calmly. The cameras have been rolling this whole time. Meghan's eyes widened slightly. She'd clearly forgotten about that. You wouldn't air this. I don't know if we will or won't, Stephen said. But I'm not afraid of people seeing what happened here tonight. Are you? Meghan didn't answer. Instead, she turned on her heel and started walking toward the exit. But she couldn't resist one final shot. She stopped at the edge of the stage and turned back. You're nothing, Stephen Colbert, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. You're just another comedian who got lucky. In 5 years, no one will remember your name. Stephen looked at her sadly. Maybe that's true, but at least people will remember me as someone who treated others with kindness. Can you say the same? Meghan's mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time that evening, she seemed genuinely at a loss. She stood there for a moment, perhaps realizing the full weight of what had just happened, what she had just done. Goodbye, Stephen said gently. I hope you find what you're looking for. That seemed to break something in Meghan. Without another word, she turned and walked off the stage, her heels clicking loudly in the silent studio. The audience watched her go, and then slowly, someone started clapping. Then another person, then another. Within seconds, the entire studio was on their feet, applauding Stephen. He stood there, looking somewhat shell-shocked by everything that had just transpired. He ran a hand through his hair and let out a long breath. The applause continued, growing louder. Well, Stephen finally said, his voice hoarse. That was not how I saw this evening going. A few people in the audience laughed, grateful for the tension release. Stephen walked back to his desk and sat down heavily, like the weight of the confrontation was finally hitting him. I want to apologize to all of you, he said, looking directly into the camera. You came here or tuned in expecting a normal show, and instead you witnessed that. I'm sorry. Don't apologize, someone from the audience shouted. Others echoed the sentiment. Stephen held up his hand. I appreciate that, he said, but I am sorry. I'm sorry that a conversation turned into a confrontation. I'm sorry that respect went out the window. And I'm sorry if anyone felt uncomfortable watching that. He paused, gathering his thoughts. The studio was hanging on his every word. I try really hard to make this show a place where people feel welcome, Stephen continued, where we can have difficult conversations but still maintain our humanity, where we can disagree but still respect each other. And tonight, that didn't happen. Not because I didn't try, but because, well, you all saw what happened. The audience applauded again, showing their support. Stephen smiled weakly. The thing is, he went on, I really did want to hear what she had to say. I think everyone deserves a platform to share their story. But that platform comes with responsibility. The responsibility to engage honestly, to listen as much as you speak, and to remember that there are real people on the other side of the conversation. He looked down at his desk, then back up at the audience. I've had thousands of guests on this show over the years. politicians I disagree with, celebrities with controversial views, people who have said things I find offensive. But we've always found a way to have a productive conversation because both sides showed up ready to actually talk, not just to score points or tear each other down. Stephen's voice grew stronger. What you saw tonight was someone who didn't want to have a conversation. She wanted a platform to stand on while putting everyone else down. And I can't provide that. I won't provide that. The audience erupted in applause again. Stephen waited for it to die down. I believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt, he said. I believe in second chances. I believe that everyone has something valuable to contribute. But I also believe in boundaries. And when someone crosses those boundaries repeatedly, when they insult you and your work and the people who support you, there has to be a line. He looked directly at the camera again. To anyone watching at home, I want you to know that you matter. Your intelligence matters. Your time matters. Your attention matters. And I will never take that for granted. I will never let someone come onto this show and suggest that you don't matter. The studio audience rose to their feet again, applauding and cheering. Some people were wiping their eyes. The moment had transformed from ugly confrontation to something more meaningful, a statement about dignity and respect. Stephen stood up, visibly moved by the response. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for sticking with us through that very awkward situation. And thank you for reminding me why I love doing this job." He walked to the front of his desk, leaning against it casually, looking more relaxed now. "You know what? I think we should still have a show tonight. We've got a great band here. We've got all of you wonderful people, and I'll be darned if I'm going to let one bad interview ruin our evening." The audience cheered. Stephen grinned, his natural charisma returning. "So, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick break. I'm going to grab some water because my throat is extremely dry right now. And when we come back, we're going to have the show we were supposed to have. Sound good?" The audience responded enthusiastically. Stephen pointed at the camera. "We'll be right back with much better vibes, I promise." As the cameras cut away, Stephen slumped slightly, the adrenaline clearly wearing off. His producers rushed onto the stage, checking on him, making sure he was okay. The audience continued to show their support, calling out encouragement. But even as the show prepared to continue, even as Stephen composed himself and got ready to deliver the rest of his monologue, the weight of what had just happened lingered in the air. A guest had come on to one of the most popular late-night shows in America and had chosen to use that opportunity not to promote, not to discuss, not to engage, but to attack. And the host, through patience and professionalism, had done the only thing he could do. He had asked her to leave. Stephen took a long drink of water, his hand shaking slightly. His head writer came up and whispered something to him. He nodded, managing a real smile this time. The countdown began for them to come back from commercial. 5, 4, 3, 2. The cameras were rolling again, and Stephen Colbert was back behind his desk, ready to finish the show. Because that's what professionals do. They keep going, even when things go wrong. They maintain their integrity, even when others lose theirs. They remember why they started doing this in the first place. To connect with people, to make them laugh, to make them think, to remind them that we're all in this together. And somewhere, walking out of that studio, was someone who had forgotten all of that. Someone who had let ego and entitlement override basic human decency. Someone who had been given a platform and had used it to tear others down instead of building anything up. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. On one side, a host who had built his career on wit, intelligence, and respect for his audience. On the other, a guest who had arrived with grievances and left with nothing but the memory of a spectacular public meltdown. Stephen looked into the camera, his composure fully restored. "All right, let's do this," he said, and there was that familiar twinkle in his eye again. "We've got a great show ahead despite everything, and I'm not going to waste another minute dwelling on negativity. Life's too short, and you all deserve better." The band started playing, the audience clapped along, and the late show continued, because that's what it does. It perseveres. It finds humor in difficulty. It maintains standards even when others try to drag it down. And most importantly, it respects the people who make it possible, the viewers at home and the audience in the studio who show up night after night because they believe in what Stephen Colbert has created. As the show went on, as jokes landed and laughter filled the studio once again, the earlier confrontation began to feel almost surreal. Had that really just happened? Had a guest actually come onto a late-night talk show and behave that way? The answer was yes, but it didn't define the evening. What defined the evening was how Stephen had handled it, with grace under pressure, with firmness when necessary, and with an unwavering commitment to the values that make good television good television. Because at the end of the day, that's what separates a great host from a mediocre one. It's not just about the jokes or the celebrity interviews or the viral moments. It's about character. It's about knowing who you are and what you stand for, and not compromising those things no matter who walks through your door. Stephen Colbert had passed that test, and in doing so, he had reminded everyone watching why he's been successful for so long. Not because he's perfect, not because he never makes mistakes, but because he treats people with respect and expects the same in return. And when he doesn't get it, he has the courage to say, enough is enough. The show ended the way it always does, with Stephen thanking his guests, well, the guests who had actually acted like guests, thanking his band, and thanking the audience. The cameras pulled back, the lights dimmed, and another episode of The Late Show was in the books. But this one would be remembered, not for the right reasons, perhaps, but remembered nonetheless. Because sometimes the most memorable television happens when things go wrong, when the carefully constructed facade falls away and you see people's true characters on display. And on this night, in this studio, two very different characters had been on display. One who understood that with great platform comes great responsibility, and one who believed that the platform existed solely to elevate themselves at others' expense. History would judge which approach was correct, but in that moment, in that studio, with that audience, there was no question who had conducted themselves with dignity and who had not. The story didn't need a conclusion because it spoke for itself. Actions had consequences, behavior mattered, and respect was not optional, it was essential. Stephen Colbert had shown that night what it means to be a professional in an increasingly unprofessional world. He had drawn a line and enforced it. He had maintained his standards when it would have been easier to let things slide. He had stood up for his audience, his staff, and himself. And in doing so, he had reminded everyone watching why character matters, why integrity matters, and why some boundaries should never be crossed, no matter who you are or what you think you deserve.